Hello, my name is Paul Shepherd. I'm one of the careers consultants at the University of Bolton, and I'm going to talk you through how to write an academic CV. So, first of all, just to let you know that because of the format of my laptop, I can't show you the slideshow version of the slide. So you will have the main slide, but you will be able to see the slides down the side as well. I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do about that, but hopefully if you expand your screen, you should be able to see the slides in big enough versions. Okay, so this is a video on how to write an academic CV. And I think, first of all, it's worth pointing out some of the basics. Some of these are generally relating to CVs, and some of them are specifically relating to academic CVs. So the last point there, you will see there tends to be some debate over the length of a CV and what is the ideal length. But what I would say is that the Vitae website, which is aimed at PhD researchers, does advocate no more than 4 pages is recommended. And quite a lot of PhD CVs can actually quite easily fit onto 2 to 3 pages, particularly if you're in the early stages of your research. But as you can see from the other main points there, it is worth bearing in mind that a CV is your passport to getting a job and can sometimes be the next step on getting that job. Okay, so now we've got the basics out of the way. Let us think about some key points. And again, many of these relate to CVs in general, not just to academic CVs, but I think it's worth reiterating them at this point. So you obviously need to tailor your CV for every application. So if you're going for a non-academic job, then you might want to have a slightly different CV in place for that. CVs are generally written in reverse chronological order. So for example, in the education section, your PhD should be at the top of that particular section and work through in reverse order. Information should stand out clearly, so the effective use of bold and bullet points is really important, as is using a reasonable amount of white space. Don't try and overcrowd your CV. So really you want to make sure it's well presented, concise, easy to read, and really importantly there in terms of the last point, it shows off your skills and evidences them by showing, not telling. So quite often people will put a list of skills on a CV without any evidence of them at all. That's really limited in its benefit to an employer or whoever is reading your CV. So please think about show, not tell. In terms of sections, as with many things to do with CVs, it is subjective to a certain extent. So you need to include the sections that you want to include in your CV. So whilst we have 13 here, you would not necessarily be expected to include all of those, but many people would include many of these on an academic CV. So I'm going to show you some examples which will highlight how to give examples of these particular sections. So if we start off with the initial details, which is obviously going to be your personal details, employers will generally need to know some basic information about you, which is your name. It doesn't have to be your full address, it can just be a postcode. But email address and LinkedIn URLs are increasingly important on CVs, and it's important to make them live hyperlinks so that the employer can click straight onto your email address and your LinkedIn URL, because without that, you're making the job more difficult for an employer who's likely to be very busy. So do please bear that in mind. So if we move on to the profile, this is basically your business card for your CV. So It allows you to introduce yourself in ideally no more than 5 to 6 lines to make a good first impression. It will have 2 or 3 key pieces of information, normally your area of expertise and research, a couple of skills that you have acquired and you're particularly proud of, and also some relevant experience that you might want to bring to people's attention in your profile. Ideally, it should be tailored to any opportunity that you're applying for. So the last line of your profile might say something like, now looking for an opportunity with, and then the name of the employer. So you can show and demonstrate that your CV is bespoke and tailored to the reader. This just gives an example. So throughout these slides, I've got some example CVs to show you. This one here is a 4-line profile. It's not specific at the end in terms of who this person wants to actually work for, but generally it can sometimes be impossible to make it that specific in terms of your profile. But this is a good example of a personal profile. And in a moment, I am going to show you the prospect CV so that we can run through some of these areas so that you can actually see them in practice. We've also got another example from our Student Hub resources as well, which I'm hoping to show you during the course of this video. So in terms of the education, your PhD should appear at the top of this section. And you really want to use some power words or active words such as solved, identified, increased, because they look more impressive. You can use bullet points, as mentioned before, to pinpoint the contribution that your research has made to your research area. So now let's have a look at the CV example. So here we have the academic CV example from the Prospects website. You can see here, if we just run through this CV, you've got the person's details there. Actually, the CV is not a hyperlink there, so it's not underlined. So actually, it would be useful if that were the case, but obviously this is merely an online example. You've got a nice short 4-line personal profile there. If we then move into the education section, you can see that the name of the university and the dates are in bold on one line. You can then see the details of the PhD, and then it goes back, and this is what we mean by reverse chronological order, to the University of Bolton and the BSc that this person has undertaken there. And you'll see here very brief details of high school. So it just includes level 3 qualifications, A-levels, and just some brief details of those, and then level 2 qualifications, which is GCSEs in the UK. We've then got a section on teaching / supervising experience. Most PhD researchers will have some experience of teaching, and that is normally really useful to include on your CV. So again, note the use of bullet points here. Note how the details are set out in bold, so it's nice and easy for the employer to read the different sections. And then if we move on to page 2, we have got the publications section here. Again, nice, brief, concise with the use of bullet points. Similarly for research skills, use of bullet points again, not too many bullet points because they can become a bit counterproductive if you've got too many. And in fact, in the conferences and presentation section, there are quite a number of bullet points here. So I would say this really is at the top end in terms of the number of bullet points you can use before it becomes counterproductive. And then you've got other sections such as awards, professional associations, other qualifications. So you can see really how we're moving towards that high number of 13 different sections. And then we're moving on to the third and final page of this person's CV here. You've got an employment section, which again has 4 bullet points per example, all the information nice and neatly set out in bold. But you can see there's a nice sense of white space on this particular CV. And it does end with the references. Again, I tend to think that references available upon request is a nice way to end any CV, but some people do prefer to put the full details down of referees And if you are going to do that, please make sure you get the permission of whoever you've put down as your references. And then you've got some really nice, useful tips here, most of which, if not all, we'll be covering in this video today. So you can see here, if we move back to the slides, I've talked about the education sector there and how you can include those in a CV and what you might want to think about. And then the employment section, I've just shown you one example, and we've got a different example listed here. So I don't need to run through the details of these because I think I've given you a good example. 4 bullet points, as we've already alluded to there. And then we can move on to a skills profile. So what we would talk about here is, I mentioned before that sometimes students will just highlight their skills, but without any evidence. So what you would want to do in terms of a skills profile is take something from the person specification where those skills are highlighted, or maybe even just a job advert if there's no person specification. Make sure that those skills then feature in your CV, or at least 3 or 4 of those skills feature in your CV. And again, remember the term show, not tell. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you an example of an academic CV with a skills profile. So here is the example I mentioned before in one of my very early slides about the Vitae website. A really useful resource. You do need to sign up and log in to be able to look at the CVs, but you've got a very good example here, a nice short career profile. But then this is an academic CV which highlights the person's skills. Again, some of these are a little bit on the long side and quite text heavy, but I just wanted to show you another example. And again, it highlights the point that CVs are subjective and not everybody is going to use exactly the same type of CV. But that's an example of a skills-based CV, which hopefully you'll find useful. So again, just highlighting some of the themes that we've picked up on. I'm not intending to read through all of these slides. Hopefully we've highlighted the fact that publications should be presented in a nice, succinct way. And similarly, references need to be nice and to the point. They are taken seriously in academia. Quite often now you will find that 3 references are expected, 1 probably being your supervisor, but then also another academic member of staff, and then perhaps a non-academic as well, to add a balance to your references, perhaps somebody who's employed you. But again, do please ask that person if they can actually, if you can actually put down their referee, put them down as a referee. And just to illustrate this, we've got the example from Student Hub, which is, you can see, a 2-page example of an academic CV. So this just shows really that you can fit all the required information on it in some cases. Again, it depends on you as an individual, but at the end here you can see that it says references available on request. So again, that's a nice way to end a CV. In fact, I don't think it needs the headline references. I think you can personally just put that in bold in the center of the final line, and then it's kind of like saying this is the end, and so you know you've got to the end of somebody's CV. So I just wanted to talk for a couple of minutes about cover letters. These can be really important. So sometimes, for example, if you're applying for a role on LinkedIn using their easy apply method of advertising vacancies, then I don't think you're necessarily expected to include a cover letter. But in most occasions where you're asked for a CV, the expectation will be that that is accompanied by a cover letter. So it's kind of like when you go to a party and you take a present and a card, the CV is the present and the card is the cover letter. So I am just going to show you an example of a really good resource in terms of cover letters. So again, we refer to the Prospects website here, which has an excellent section on cover letters. Not only will it tell you what is a cover letter, but it also gives you an indication of how to write one by dividing it normally into 4 paragraphs. It needs to fit onto 1 page of A4, ideally. How to reference people in a cover letter, because we find that students often are not familiar with how to do this correctly. And then there were several really good examples of cover letters on there. And if you click onto any of these, so for example, if you just click onto the one that says cover letter by an international graduate, this will give you an idea of what to include in a cover letter, the length, how to lay it out, etc. You may again want to use bullet points in there. So there you have a nice little section on cover letters. And now we come to the penultimate slide, which is some further resources that you should be able to use having watched this video. So we've talked very clearly, I think, through the prospects example, but you've also got websites like jobs.ac.uk and the Imperial University website, which has got a really good feature on how to write an academic CV. The Vitae website I've talked about before, but I also want to show you how to use Student Hub in terms of the information available on CVs and to hash out how to use the CV 360 feature. So this is the Student Hub page, which hopefully most of you are familiar with. If you go onto the section here on CV and cover letters, you will see there's a CV builder, which can help you build your CV. There is CV 360, which can actually help you to get an evaluation of your CV using software. You can then send it to me or one of my colleagues afterwards, and we can actually have a look at your CV. So that will actually come through the CV advisor checking service. So if you go onto the appointment section here, you can obviously book a one-to-one appointment to discuss your CV and or cover letter, but you can get your document checked through this excellent CV cover letter check facility. So you fill in this, it only takes a couple of minutes to fill in, and then you say what is the reason for your CV check or application. You then include the document that you want checking, and then at the end of that, once you've done it, you could submit. In the bottom right hand corner, it comes through the Student Hub generic email, and then it gets allocated to one of the careers advisors to then have a look at and evaluate your CV for you. So hopefully that will be a useful tool for you going forward. You'll see here, if you actually click on to CV and cover letters, it will show you a number of examples. And if you click on here to the academic CV example and click on visit document, that will then give you the example that we've looked at briefly today. So again, that should be able to help you going forward with any academic CV that you write over time. So that brings us towards the end of this video webinar on how to write an academic CV. It just remains for me to advise you how you can make contact with us. You can do so by calling into the careers service in person, which is in Chancellor's Mall next to Student Services. You can telephone us to make an appointment, or you can actually just make an appointment yourselves using the Student Hub facilities. That's probably the easiest way to do so, because it gives you control on when and where you have that appointment, which can be face-to-face, over the telephone, or via Zoom. There's an email address here if you want to make contact with us. So I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Please feel free to make an appointment with me or one of my colleagues if you want to discuss your CV further. Put it through CV 360 first if you haven't already done so. And I would just like to wish you all the best with your academic CV, and I look forward to seeing some of you over the coming weeks and months. Thank you very much for your time. Bye now.